Christian Mary Wells. As she voices the sentiment of God when he looks at our lives. Yes. If you know the song. It says, I have two lovers, but I ain't ashamed. Two lovers, but I love them both the same. One treats me good like a lover should. That's why I love him. But then she says, one treats me bad. It makes me sad, makes me cry, but I can't deny that I love him. Now, if you pay attention to one of the last lines in the song, she says, the reality is, you have a split personality, and both of them are you.
Yes, right.
So she wasn't talking about two different people. She was talking about one person being two different things.
Wow. Right.
And so I kind of want to sum up what we were talking about. We were doing the prayer, but here's the issue. Here's the issue. The issue is when I'm attempting both in my life to depend on God and depend on myself at the same time. All right. The anchor verse that will sum this up, if you'll drop down to Matthew chapter 6 and verse 25. Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. If you drop down there, he says, Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. If you had that, say amen. Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. Here's the anchor verse. This kind of sums up what comes before and what comes after. This is the hinge verse. This is the key. This is the primary principle. He says, therefore, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life. Let me stop right there. Do not be anxious about your life. Now, matter of fact, he says, therefore, and literally the words are, because of this, do not live your life in anxiety. Amen. So what I want to address today is how to overcome the anxiety, the stress, and the tension within which you live your life. Anybody dealing with any stress, anxiety, and tension? God says, do not be anxious about anything. As a matter of fact, you know the cross reference in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 and 7. What does he say? Be anxious, literally, be anxious in not one thing. But what does he say? With everything, with what? Prayer, supplication, and thanksgiving, let your request be made known unto God. Now here's what blows my mind. If I'm submitting everything to God with prayer, supplication, and thanksgiving, he says, and the peace of God. The end result of that is not the answer to my prayer in the way that I want it to be answered. The end result is whether God answers it or not, whether God gives me what I want or he gives me something else, I will not live my life in anxiety. I will be able to walk in peace. Amen. Now, so we see the cross reference here in Matthew chapter 6. He says, I've been saying all this stuff up to this point to get you to one principle, and that is stop living your life in a constant state of anxiety. Amen. All right, so let's see if I can break this apart. He says, therefore. Everybody say, therefore. Therefore. Now you know, anytime you see therefore, we got to back it up. All right, so let's back it up. All right, let's put it in reverse. Now, number one, this statement is a command, which implies that this is something that I recognize and I wrestle with on a regular basis. I'm going from one thing that's causing anxiety to the, am I just talking to myself? I mean, it's just as soon as I settle one issue, here comes another. Anybody experience that?
Yes.
And then once I settle that issue, here comes three more.
Yes.
And then here comes three more. And sometimes it's not so much the issue, but it's the anxiety that the issue causes in my life. And so when I'm walking around with anxiety, even the smallest things will cause me to go off.
Yes. Amen.
Y'all trying to be holy in here. That's right.
Yes.
Interesting, but look at the word anxiety right there. You see it in verse 25. It is, in some ancient languages, used as an idiomatic expression that means to be killed with your mind, or to be pained by your thinking. So here it is. I'm facing this situation, I'm dealing with this difficulty, I'm having this relationship issue, I'm having this financial issue, I'm having this career issue, whatever it is, I'm having this decision to make, but it's the rolling around of it in my mind that's killing my spirit.
Wow. Yes.
Why is that happening? Because I'm trying to both depend on God and depend on myself at the same time. Oh, I know, I trust, I believe God. God can do all these things, and I'm going to submit to prayer. I'm going to tell everybody to pray for it when I come to church. But when I get home, I start strategizing, and I start thinking, what are the ramifications? How am I going to have to change my life? I don't have the resources to be able to take care of all of this. And so now, over and over, it's killing my spirit just thinking about the problem. And if I don't get a handle on that, it's going to degenerate into complete and total dejection, stress, and constant depression. Now, how many have been sad before? You've been sad about something. You've been, you know, there are always going to be things that make you sad. Am I right about it? There's always going to be things that knock you offline or get you off kilter. But the point is, am I going to live in a constant state of depression? It gets so bad that I don't even have to have an issue in my life, and I still feel like I'm carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. All right, so he says, no, you cannot live in a constant state of anxiety. Now, in the Latin Vulgate, when you look at that, the word for anxiety is the same word we get solicit from. It's soliciti from solicitus. All right, say that 10 times fast. It means to move or to shake. So the idea is, as you're journeying through life, you will run into something unexpected, and it will literally move and shake your life up. Once you become accustomed to your way and your order, somebody will say the wrong thing, somebody will do the wrong thing, you come to work and find a pink slip, whatever it is, you get in your car and you start it and it won't start. It shakes up your life. So now, if you already have a bubble of anxiety, then it will execute the anxiety that's already under your skin, because whether you realize it or not, you're living in a constant state of anxiety. It doesn't matter. Maybe you did something wrong and you've incurred some consequences, and it's shaking up anxiety in your life. Anybody ever face anxiety? I'm trying to help just paint this picture. Now, all right, so now here's the idea. This is the principle, write this down. Here's the difficulty. This is what really initiates this idea. If I am living a need-based life rather than a purpose-based life, if I'm living a need-based life rather than a purpose-based life, in other words, the sum total of my life is my own attempt to acquire that which I need. And if I'm not getting that which I need, then I fall into my default of anxiety, stress, dejection, and depression. So if I'm going from need to need to need, there's no solution for the stress in my life. What God is saying with this entire sermon is, you've got to shift your focus from your needs to your purpose.
Come on now. Wow.
Matter of fact, and I don't mean any harm, there's nothing wrong with blessings and all that, but sometimes we focus way too much on what we can get from God rather than what we can give to God.
Wow.
Now, if I shift that, if I give to God, then the blessings will come as a byproduct. So I do not have to be a blessing chaser. I need to get my blessing. I got to get my blessing on. I need this to happen. I need to break through. All that kind of nothing wrong with that. But I cannot spend my entire life chasing my breakthrough. Because if I'm chasing my breakthrough, then I'm never going to reach it. God is saying, don't worry about the breakthrough. That's my job. I need you to focus not on your needs, but on your purpose.
Come on now.
What is your purpose? What is God designed for you? What is God designed for you to do? All right. So now let's break this apart a little bit. Okay. So back in verse 25, he said, "Therefore." Let's say therefore. Therefore. So now here's the context. All that we've been talking about. Let me sum this up this way, and we'll see how this all fits together. We've already talked about the details coming up to chapter 6, verse 25. All right. In context, what he's saying, what we've already addressed, are stress causers. If you deal with what we've already addressed, then that will begin to eliminate the anxiety in your life. If you're suffering some anxiety, just look at amen. Look me an amen. You know how to look at amen? Just raise your hand because somebody else is going to see you, and they're going to be nosy and want to know what it is that's going on in your life. All right. So you ready? 1, 2, 3. Look at amen. If you're okay, all right. I see that look. I see that look. I see that look. All over the building. I see that look. All right. So now, what God said is not going to go away with time. Say amen, somebody.
Amen.
It's not going to go away because you're nice.
Amen.
You have to contend with these issues that we have dealt with in detail if you want this anxiety to live your life. Now here's the difficulty, and this is what we talked about. If you become comfortable in your depression, you will get to the point where you don't even want to get out of it.
Wow.
Which is why the first question that God asked the man who was lame for 40 years, he said, before I do anything for you, I want to know, do you want to be whole? Because if you don't want it, I'm going to pass you by. I'm wasting my time. For 40 years, they had been carrying him from his house and laying him in front of the pool. And so he became accustomed to laying at the pool and saying, I'm waiting on the troubling of the water. Now, he hadn't seen the water troubled in 40 years. So you waiting for 40 years for something you've never seen happen in your life.
Come on now.
God says, I want to know, do you want to be whole?
Yes.
My question is, do you want the depression to go away? I'll answer that too quickly. Are you willing to let go of your love of being a victim? Well, now, I'm going through stuff, and the stuff I'm going through gives me the right to be a victim. Then you're not ready yet. I don't make the kind of money that I deserve to be making, and I'm going to be a victim, and I'm going to complain about it every chance that I get. You're not ready for your breakthrough.
Wow. Come on now.
God says, at what point are you going to decide that I'm not going to love victimhood anymore? I'm going to leave it laying there, and it's time for me to get up.
Yes. Teach Holy Ghost.
He says, no. So you got to deal with this. Now you remember, in context, we've dealt with already four major things: temptation, the beatitudes, the similitudes, and the platitudes. Y'all remember those 4 things that we dealt with? The temptation. So let me sum up those 4 things this way as it relates to the de-stressing of your life. All right. Number 1, here's stress causer. Number 1, based on it, therefore, if you constantly submit to temptation, then it will be a stress causer in your life.
Yes.
Let's practice that. Look at amen again. Let's just look at amen. If there is is something in your life that you fall to every single time.
Come on now.
Here's the backwards nature of this. A lot of times, we will turn to that which tempts us in order to de-stress us.
Jesus.
However, instead of being stressed, it's adding to the stress.
Right.
So I have to be strong enough to say, I'm going to put down that which I think I need to be able to cope with my life.
Come on now.
This is some rough stuff, isn't it? Because it's not helping me, it's sending me further down the rabbit hole of depression.
Wow.
That's why I need it more often, I need it stronger, and that's why I turn away from a lot of my other responsibilities, because I'm still trying to get rid of this anxiety, and I'm using something that causes the anxiety I'm trying to get rid of.
Wow.
That's why I deal with the whole temptation. How many of you know that whenever you do wrong or you go outside of God's will, you'll have a situation in your hands?
Yes.
And now the situation brings stress with it. Am I right about it?
Yes.
So number one, I can decide that I'm going to stop submitting to my temptations.
Yes.
Oh, Lord God. Almighty, help me. Number two, we talked about the Beatitudes. Remember, we talked about that. That's work on the inside.
Yes.
Number two, if I am a surface dweller, what do I mean by that? I demonstrate my joy and happiness on the outside.
Come on now.
And I've become a master of acting joyful on the outside, but there's fragility on the inside.
Yes.
Then it will crush like a sinkhole. Remember we talked about sinkhole syndrome?
Yes. Yes.
It will crush my soul and my spirit on the inside. Number three, remember we talked about salt and light. You're a salt eater, you're the light
Yes.
of the world. Another stress causer is if I'm swayed by my surroundings. Why did you talk about salt and light? Because you have one or two options. Either you're going to be influenced by the world or you're going to influence the world.
Come on now.
There's no middle ground. You're going to be one or the other. Either I'm going to impact the world or the world is going to impact me. In other words, I'm going to get my instruction from everybody else how to think, act, and feel. And so when I think, act, and feel, I'm thinking, acting, and feeling outside of God, and it's going to cause and generate stress in my life.
Yes.
And number four, self-fulfillment. If I live my life, that's when we talked about, you remember we talked about the anger and the lust and the oaths and the retaliations. All four of those things have to do with self-fulfillment. So now, if I'm living my life trying to fulfill myself, then it's going to cause stress because I don't have that which it takes to fulfill me. And now, if I'm dealing with my anger, if I'm dealing with my lust, if I'm dealing with oaths or retaliation, my intended target is not going to be as affected as I am by my own anger. So if I'm throwing anger to somebody else, it's going to hurt me more than it hurts the other person. Amen. If I'm trying to get retaliation and get my vengeance and get back and get somebody a piece of my mind, I'm the one that's going to lose and not them because they're not thinking about me and they have moved on. That's what God says. Retaliation is mine, says the Lord. I will repay.
Yes.
All right? All of those are stress causers. All right? So how do we begin to fix this? And that's when we talked about the prayer. I'm still in context. All right? When we look at the Lord's Prayer, remember that this is a prayer of alignment. It is to line me up with the will of God. When he says, this is how you pray to get back in line. Because as long as you are out of line with God, then you're going to have depression in your life. It is not possible to walk in peace and joy and be out of line with God at the same time. I'm not talking about y'all, I'm talking about those who are on summer vacation. Amen. Because y'all here, y'all in line with God. Anyway. So now he says, what you constantly have to do is you have to constantly pray in a way that lines you up. Because if you're a human being and you live in this life, every now and then you're going to get out of line. Or any perfect people in here, any other people? Every now and then you're going to get out of line. You're talking about a car. You can drive it miles after miles, but I don't care how well you drive your car, it's going to lose its alignment. Because on the road, there are some things, bumps and potholes and pitfalls that will cause the car to get out of alignment. The same thing is true in your life. You cannot live this life without hitting a pitfall or a pothole every now and then. Yeah. The point is, you don't have to fall completely apart just because you hit a pothole. That's right. Now, if you fall apart when you hit your pothole in life, it will get you out of line with God. Some of us will even get mad with God and say, I'm no longer going to serve you because you let me hit this pothole. Yes. He said, well, if you would have let me handle the steering wheel, you would have missed the pothole in the first place. But no, I'm going to drive the way I want to drive, and I'm going to go where I want to go, and then I run into a pothole. See, you're not tall enough to see over the dashboard. I saw the pothole 5 miles ago. That's right. And you headed straight forward. But it gets your life out of line. That's why he says this is how you pray. This is how you pray. Let your name be sanctified. In other words, the idea is whether I hit a pothole or not in my life, whether I have difficulty in my life, or if I'm having trouble that's causing stress, you have to flip it around. You have to say, Lord, even though I'm going through this stress, let your name be sanctified. Yeah. You know when he says, hallowed be thy name, it's really a command, it's not a description. He says, let your name be sanctified. So the first thing I'm going to pray before I ask you to get me out of this, while I am in it, glorify your name through me as I'm suffering through this pothole. Yes. He says, what I want you to do, I'm going to re-look at my problem as an opportunity for you to get the glory. Yes. Thank you, Lord, for choosing me to go through this challenge so you can bring glory to your own name. Yes. Because if I refocus that, then whatever it is I'm going through is not going to pull me into my depression. Yes. Thank you, Lord. Hallelujah. All right. He says, let your name be sanctified. He says, let your kingdom come. We're talking about I'm living my life based on kingdom purpose. Let your will be done. In other words, I am deciding that I want my will to match his will. And so therefore, I'm going to want what he wants. And he is a giver of what he wants. And so now, if I want what I want and I don't get it, then I become mean, evil, and hard to get along with. And so it's not that God is not giving me what I want. He doesn't give it to you because it doesn't belong to you. He says, that's not what I want you to want. I want you to change what you want. So what you want is in line with what I want, because what I want for you is better than what you want for yourself. And then he goes on, he says, let your will be done. Give us your daily bread. The whole issue with that, and this is about where we kind of rushed last week, is that when you pray, he says, I want you to pray in a way that you're learning how to trust me and trust me alone. It says, give me my daily bread. There's a reference to the manna falling from heaven. In other words, trust that if I am going to handle you in the right now, that means I'm the same God and I'm going to handle you in the not yet. So you cannot pray for the right now and worry about the not yet at the same time. It says, if I'm feeding you manna today, children of Israel, then you ought to come to the conclusion that I'm going to feed you manna tomorrow. That's why you don't save it up for tomorrow, because I'm teaching you how to trust me and trust me alone. He said, I'm trying to work through your trust issues. And then he goes on to talk about, now we're leading all this stuff to trust. One of the biggest trust causes right here. He says, when you pray, forgive me. Lord Jesus. sins, death, and trespasses, whatever your translation is, what's the same in all translations is forgive me.
Yes.
Now, when you do wrong, you incur consequences. Am I right about it? You incur consequences. It is a heavy burden. To forgive means to lift. Remember we talked about that last week. It says, I'm stressed, if I'm honest, because I've been living life outside of your will.
Yes, Lord.
I've been doing some things that according to the scripture are not pleasing to you.
Yes.
And as a result, I'm carrying the burden or the consequence of living outside of your will. How many of you know that if you do something outside of your will, you will incur some kind of burden?
Yes.
A lot of times don't make the correlation. We think, why is this happening to me? Part of the reason why it's happening to you right now is because you're outside of God's will. You're handling things in your life in a way that God did not prescribe for you to handle.
Yes.
So he says, what I want you to do is ask for forgiveness. Ask me to lift the burden even though you were the one that was wrong. God is saying this is how mercy works. Even though you make the mistake, even though you're living outside of God, even though you're handling life in a way as not prescribed in his word, he says, I will still lift that burden from you if you will also be a burden lifter of the person that has wronged you. If you do not lift the burden from the person who has wronged you, then you will carry that burden and it will cause stress, anxiety, and depression in your life. You have to let it go. Does that mean I have to be okay with him? No. It doesn't mean you have to be okay with him. Does it mean that I have to subject myself to the same problem? No, you don't subject yourself to the same problem, but you cannot be executioner, judge, and jury and hold them in condemnation in your heart. Matter of fact, they don't even have to be in your life anymore. They don't even have to be alive anymore. Some people are cold and dead in the grave and got other people still upset and mad with them. Wait till I see him in the afterlife. I'm going to be tearing you up from one end of heaven to the other end of heaven. Oh, I can't wait. God says, you're killing yourself. He says, for whatever they did, I'm going to deal with them. But if you're not willing to start the journey of forgiveness, then I will not remove the burden that you have incurred by your own errors. So I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And you will live in stress of unforgiveness, which turns into bitterness, which inflames your anxiety and depression. God says, the reason why you're dealing with that is there's something in your life. And you've covered it up and concealed it so good that you don't even think about it anymore, but it's still there. He says, I'm going to need you to handle that if you want to be free. Then he goes on and he says, lead us not into temptation. That's a self-direction issue. And deliver us from the evil one. Why does it say, and the way that it's written, it's not deliver us from evil, it's deliver us from the evil one. Why do we need deliverance from the evil one? Here it is. Because the evil one, what is his job? To discourage you, to disturb you, to accuse you, and to destroy anything that you seek to do for the purpose of God. Now, if you're already walking in anxiety, his job is really easy.
Yes.
He don't have to do much. He don't have to roar back and bring thunderstorms in your life. All he needs is send one person to look at your wrong. And then you no more good for the rest of the day. Who they think they is? Walking up looking at me like that. I can't wait till tomorrow. I'm going to confront them and sit down and say, why are you looking at me like that? Okay, not y'all. We make his job really easy.
Yes. Yes, we do.
He can knock us off by the slightest and the shortest thing. That's why he says, you got to pray, deliver me from the evil one. So part of the deliverance from the evil one is deliverance from you on the inside.
Come on now. Come on now.
All right, that's what the therefore says. So let's go back to 25. He says, therefore, do not be anxious about your life. He says, it is not your, listen, y'all listening? He says, let me get preacher. He says, it is not your job. Okay, sorry, that didn't work. Okay. Come on. It's not your job to be anxious about your life. And no, let me stop. Because he's going to jump on me for real. Y'all be like, I'll tell you, when I first started preaching, I tried that one time, and I couldn't get out of that. I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, oh, Lord, and so I started to tone so high, I had nowhere to go. And they wait for more. I'm like, Lord, get me out of it. I don't know how to get out of it. So I said, maybe I'll just talk my way through the scriptures. Y'all leave me alone. Yeah, leave me alone. So he says, and not one thing, let me stress. Now, there are 3 scenarios that he gives between the prayer and between verse 25 that lead up to the don't be anxious about your life. We'll deal with that and then we'll be done. There are 3 scenarios, and there's a common theme in those scenarios. Still got your Bibles open? The first scenario is from verse 19 to 21. Look at it. First scenario is from verse 19 to verse 21. The second scenario is verse 22 and 23. That's number 2. And then the third scenario is verse 24. These are the things that climactically raise up toward the epitome of anxiety. So now, those are 3 things. Now, in those 3 things, there are 3 things that are being contrasted. They are common in that each scenario has a contrast. Y'all walking with me? Everything has a this or that, this or that, this or that. Now the first contrast in verse 19 through 21, you're looking at it, is a contrast between heaven and earth. Y'all see that?
Yes.
Heaven and earth, specifically to do with treasure. Treasures in heaven and treasures in earth. This is all informing the root of your anxiety, all right? The second one is light versus darkness. You see that? Light versus, so heaven and earth, and light versus darkness. And then 24 is God and mammon. Y'all see that? If you have the King James Version, it says God and mammon, all right? So now those are 3 dualistic things. Now, the idea is, if I'm oscillating between one and the other, that's what causes the anxiety in my life, because I'm not choosing one or the other. That's why Mary Wells said, I have 2 lovers, but I love them, I ain't ashamed, I have 2 lovers, but I love them both the same. So basically, in 19 and 21, it deals with treasures in heaven and treasures in earth. He says, if you're oscillating between the importance of heavenly treasure and earthly treasure, you're going to live in anxiety. If my number 1 importance is treasure, I have to choose which treasure is going to be most important to me. I cannot have love and devoted love for both heavenly treasure and earthly treasure. Anybody know, well, maybe you don't know, and I don't want to tell on myself, but anybody who was young in your young days, anybody ever tried to date 2 people at the one? Okay, let's look at I saw a hand. I'm not going to tell you who that hand was. Look at amen. It is very, very, very difficult to date 2 people at one time. Am I right about it? Because you have to learn how to do Valentine's Day for two people on the same day, because you can't take one out on Valentine's Day on February the 15th, or else you're going to have a problem maintaining your relationship. Am I right about it?
Yeah.
I'm just, yeah. So that's what you do. You got to learn how to be careful, because you're testifying right now. You have to learn how to eat 2 full dinners in one night. You have to be very artful and skilled at changing your communication habits. You have to be able to have one circle of friends and then another circle of friends, and make sure that circle doesn't come together. I'm not talking about what I know. This is just what I read in a book about dating somewhere 20 years ago. But it's very hard to be devoted to one and devoted to another. And if you have an argument with one, you have an argument with the other. Now you got to have 2 arguments. And so what God is saying, you cannot date 2 things at the same time. Either heavenly treasure is going to be important, or earthly treasure is going to be important. Now let's unpack that just a little bit. Look at verse 19. In verse 19, if you go back to that, he says, lay not for yourselves treasures on earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Now, everybody say the word treasure.
Treasure.
Now, if you look at that word, when he says lay up, not treasures, he literally uses a different form of the same exact word. So the translation is a little clunky. The idea is, watch this, listen, he's saying, do not treasure earthly treasure.
Come on now.
Y'all walking with me?
Yeah.
What he's saying is, do not treasure earthly treasure. He did not say there was anything wrong with earthly treasure. In other words, he's saying, you know, if you have a flow of wealth and income, there's nothing wrong with that. But he says you cannot treasure your treasure. It cannot be the most important thing in your life. It cannot be that which drives you. You have to be driven not by your earthly treasure, whether you have it or not. You've got to be driven by your heavenly treasure. Because if you have a drive for earthly treasure, it will stress you and sometimes make you check out of life. Some people walk out on their family and children because they're chasing earthly treasure. But God says, what I want you to do is to take care of your family and children, so you're stockpiling heavenly treasure. You see the difference between the two? You cannot have the both at the same time as number one importance. So the idea here is not so much, he's not saying don't possess earthly possessions. He's saying make sure earthly possessions don't possess you.
Come on.
It's just a house, it's just a car, it's just a bank account. And he literally says, this is 2 things that happen to earthly treasure. Look at it, what he said. He says, moth will come and literally eat it up. Or, what's the other thing he says? Not only will a moth come and eat it up, but robbers will come in and steal it. It literally means hole diggers, because they were people who would dig holes in the walls of houses, come in and take the treasure box. And so 2 things that happen. Either money is going to get eaten up, or money is going to lose its value.
Yes.
You know, act like that. You know that if you live in this life, I don't care what kind of treasure you have, there will always be something that shows up to consume that treasure. Unexpected expenses, tax time, fees, whatever it is, family members that are begging all the time, whatever it is, that treasure is subject to being consumed. Now what he's saying is, if that treasure is number one importance to you, when it is consumed, then you will fall into anxiety. You have to be willing to walk away from that which has earthly value. You have to remember that everything that has earthly value has come from God and God alone.
Yes.
And he says, if you don't do right by me with regard to your treasure and how you feel about it, I know how to get it out of your pocket. And I ain't talking about anybody asking for your money. Amen.
Yes.
Say amen.
Amen.
Come on, it's been 3 years and I haven't talked about it, so I have the right to talk about finance. All right, so he says, what I want you to do, I want you to fall in love with heavenly treasure, because if you fall in love with heavenly treasure, I'll take care of the earthly treasure. You don't have to worry about that. Number 2, he says, what's the next thing? It says eyes, light, and darkness. The eyes, light, and darkness. Actually, that's an idiomatic expression that means actually to be generous. If you have light in your eye, they would use it in ancient times to mean generous. So let me sum it up because we're running short on time. The idea is if you have earthly treasure and you're not generous with earthly treasure, then it will cause stress and anxiety in your life.
Amen.
God is saying the reason why I bless you with earthly things.
Yes, Pastor.
Number 1, because I love you and I want you to be blessed. But number 2, I want you to be an agent of blessing for somebody else in
Yes.
need. Why? Because at the core of all of this, he says, love me and then love your neighbor.
Yes.
If you look at the very first church in the book of Acts, it says everyone who came had that which they what? Needed. Not because God caused money to fall out of heaven, but because he caused some hearts to be liberal. And he says the more that you're liberal, the more I will bless you. It is the law of divine reciprocity, and he always sticks by his word. The problem is if I'm in love with earthly treasure, then I am a clutcher rather than a giver. And so I'll hold on to it. But if you hold on to it long enough, even the money that you're holding on to, or the house or the car, whatever it is, at some point it's going to lose its value.
Yes.
All it takes is inflation. And that dollar isn't the same thing as it used to be 20 years ago.
Amen.
So God is saying, if all your eggs are in earthly treasures, guess what? It's going to be eaten up and it's going to lose its value.
Yes.
And then thirdly, he says, right there in verse 24. Here it is. No one can serve 2 masters. Nobody can date 2 people at the same time successfully without stress. Amen.
Amen.
He says, either he will hate one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to one and love the other. He says, you cannot serve God. King James says mammon. That blows my mind because King James, some of the translators was translating the word of God, and they came to that word and they refused to translate it. It's an Aramaic word that means money. And that was so hard for them to continue with. They said, we're just going to leave that word in the Aramaic. So we think that folk are talking about some type of foreign unknown God. No, it means money. If I say money, it's not a dirty word in church. Money. It says you cannot love God and love money. He didn't say you couldn't have money. Say amen, because we got to need it on planet Earth. But he says you can't fall in love with it, because if you love that, you're going to hate me.
Yes. All right. Amen.
So he says, there's an old adage that says, matter of fact, he says, where your treasure is, your heart is. There's an old adage that says you can determine where anybody's heart is by 3 things. By 3 things. Where they spend their time, where they spend their mind, and where they spend their dime. Those 3 things will let you know where somebody's heart really is. So he says, if your eye is healthy, literally, if it is single, in other words, you're living not in double vision, the idea there is you are not enamored by the gift, but you're enamored by the giver. So I can never fall in love with blessing. I can never fall in love with God gives. And thank God he gives it. But I'm going to be more in love with the giver than I am with the gift. Let me illustrate this here. My daughter, Anya, just the other day. with her 15-year-old self. You know, what happens to these sweet, innocent little children that you love and adore and adore and they raise their hand talking about, Daddy, pick me up, and ride on your neck, and you can just say anything. They're like, oh, Daddy, you're so much. What happens to them at about 14, 15, and 16? Love her to death. But my daughter, and don't y'all tell me, tell her I'm talking about it because I'm going to have to hear about it for the rest of the day. I said, I'm sorry, baby, you a preacher's kid, so you're going to get talked about. I got talked about, you're going to get talked about because I was a preacher's kid too. Now, she loves French fries. I think that girl's going to turn into a French fry. She loves them so much. Dad, can we go get some French? Of course. So we're riding and hanging out, spending some time, father-daughter time and all that, and we passed by Chick-fil-A, because now she don't like McDonald's anymore, she likes Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A French fry. She says, Daddy, yeah, there you go. She said, can I get some French fries? Because I said, okay, and I made a mistake of saying, do you want small, medium, or large? I gave her an option. I didn't realize that her mama doesn't give her that option. And she said, no, you're going to get small and medium. She said, no, Dad, I want large, because mama always give me, oh yeah, you a dad today. I said, yeah, don't tell mom, I'm going to get you some large fries. Daddy's going to reach deep into his pocket, and I'm going to buy you some large fries. So now we're moving along with our day. She's happy. She's got her container of large fries. And so, you know, I see her eating those fries, and I start, you know, feeling a taste in my mouth. It's like, you know what, I kind of like French fries too. And so I reach over just to get the fry. Get your hand back from my fries. Oh, hey, hold on, wait a minute, time out. That ain't how we do this. I took one, and she literally grabbed my wrist, and we were wrestling over one French fry. Don't you eat my fries! I said, hold up, wait a minute. I'm the one that bought the fries.
Amen, Pastor.
You can't give me just one French fry. You got a large container full of fries. And I'm not going to give you one. No! I said, baby, I could buy a whole tub of fries. And you won't give me one?
Yep, I understand.
Don't get mad at my daughter. Because we do God the same way.
Yes.
I've given you everything you have.
Everything you got.
Your health, your strength, your possessions, your job, your good report the last time you went to the doctor. Who do you think gave you that? God says, will you help a brother out? Will you bring an offering to church? Will you feed somebody who's hungry? No! These my fries.
Wow.
Don't ever get to the point in life where you're so in love with what God gives you that you cannot give him a little something back to him, which is his in the first place. Because he says, you can do it voluntarily, and I only want a little bit. Or I can take it all back from you. I told my baby, you act like that, I will never buy you any French fries anymore for the rest of your life.
Wow.
Don't fall in love with a French fry. Fall in love with the one who buys the French fries. I think that's a good point right there. Heads about.